Peter, James, and John and takes them up the mountain so that they could experience His transfiguration, the beauty of prayer, the beauty of His dialogue with God the Father. And the second reading reminds us that our citizenship is not here on earth, that our citizenship is in heaven, and that everything we do must point towards heaven. And He gives us this hope that one day our bodies are going to be glorified, are going to be transformed and conformed to Jesus' own body. What a beautiful, beautiful reality. And all of it speaks about prayer and just being with God and letting God transform you. And letting God enter into our hearts so that our hearts can be transformed and transfigured as well. So everything is pointing beyond our physical world. Everything is pointing towards heaven so that we can focus there. Everything is leading us towards the reality of the spiritual world. The reality of where God exists and where God wants to love us and to enter into our hearts. And you know what? There's this gap between heaven and earth, right? And the only thing that bridges that, it's our prayer. Whenever we enter into prayer, we're able to bridge this gap between heaven and earth, where we, in our humility and our surrendering, we allow God to enter into our hearts. And whenever we make a space for Him to just be with us and to allow Him a moment of silence just to love us and to gaze at us, it becomes a moment where we can dialogue between God and ourselves so that we can encounter the madness of His love for us. Prayer is about entering into the reality of God's love for us. Prayer is about surrendering ourselves to the Father. It is about relating whatever it is in our hearts, whatever struggle, whatever issues, whatever it is, whatever difficulties we're going through. Prayer is meant to be that space where we give it up to the Lord and the Lord comes and takes it away from us. Today in the readings we found these beautiful examples of Abraham, of Peter, James, and John. They're taken by God outside of their comfort zone and they're pointed towards heaven. And if you notice, they did not have a method. They did not have a specific type of prayer. They simply were being with God and they let themselves be carried by God. And it is not that God just came and picked them up physically and dumped it outside so that they can look at the skies, right? Like they must have spent time with Jesus. We know that the apostles were following Jesus. And so Abraham must have been the same thing. He must have allowed God, some silence for God to come into his heart so that in the midst of that silence, he must have felt God's pull into his heart saying, come out, look at the sky. And so they had moments of silence in their hearts so that God could be with them. And it is within that the Lord called them. It is within that the Lord revealed Himself with them in their hearts. They enter into this dialogue between God and themselves. And it was in the silence of their hearts. It was there that they could hear the voice of the Lord saying, come out, let's go up the mountain, let's go pray. Come, follow me. It's such an example for us to follow. And it gives us such great hope because we do not have to have the perfect prayer. Perhaps the fact of the matter is that all of us perhaps don't even know how to pray, including myself. Sometimes I wonder and I forget that prayer is just about being with God and letting God love you, letting God size and pierce your heart. And letting the raging of His love just completely overwhelm you without you having to say anything. But just simply allowing God to enter into your heart and just be with Him. That is the power of prayer. And it is within that prayer that the Lord comes and heals and transforms and transfigures ourselves. It is there where the Lord shares Himself. It is there where the Lord shares His raging love for us. Not because we have earned it. Not because of whatever we said. But simply because we spend time with the Lord in silence. And there is something terrifying about silence. I think I talked about it already. But in silence, we heard from Abraham, the first reading, that there's a trance that fall upon him. And that there was a thick darkness that came over him. And Abraham was terrified. But even in the midst of that darkness, in the midst of that fear, Abraham was able to see this fire of God. And it was that fire of God that entered into his heart that filled him with peace. And it was that fire that made this pact with Abraham, Something similar happened with the apostles when they're up in the mountain. They're terrified when this cloud is coming upon them. It is God Himself. And they're terrified. They don't know what to say. And in the midst of that fear, the cloud comes over them and they're able to hear that voice of God. This is my chosen one. Listen to Him. Listen to Him. And so we find ourselves in the second week of Lent, right? We're beginning this second week. And it is a time to increase our prayer. And it's important to ask ourselves, are we really increasing the times that we spend with God alone in our prayer? Are we really allowing ourselves to be transformed by God? Are we really coming to the Lord with our thirst, with our hunger, with our heart full of desire to encounter Him, to seek His transfiguration, to seek His beauty, to seek His majesty? Because if we're not allowing God, if we're not given time, if we're not given silent time to the Lord, how do we expect to see His glory? How do we expect His love to transform us? It is not about magic. It is about spending time with the Lord and being with the Lord. It is about telling the Lord that, Lord, I don't know what to tell you, but I want to come and I want to experience you. I want to see your fire. I want to see your love. We must not be overwhelmed by the fear that comes by not knowing how to pray, or by the silence and the darkness of silence. We must take courage that even in the midst of those fears, in the midst of that darkness, the Lord wants to love us and that we will see the fire of God. We must recognize that we are not just citizens. We're not just U.S. citizens, right? We're citizens of heaven, and that's where we're going, and that's where we ought to strive to be there, together with our families, with our friends, building community, building spaces of prayer for God to come and be with us. Allowing God to pour Himself into our hearts so that we can be, so that we can love, so that we can serve. Allowing God to strengthen us in our weaknesses, in our fears, in our doubts. So the Lord is asking us to look towards heaven, to place our minds and our hearts there where He is, where He wants to take us. And as we continue throughout our Lenten journey, let us take the opportunity to really learn from the Lord, to be at His feet, to see how He fasts, to see how He's fighting the temptations of the devil, to see how the Lord perseveres in His communion, in His dialogue with the Father. And it is by being at the feet of Jesus that we will learn how to do it, that we will be strengthened, that we will be filled with courage, with humility, and with passion to do it. It is there that the Lord wants to encounter us and love us. In just a few minutes, you're about to receive communion, Holy Communion. You're about to receive Jesus, God Himself coming to you. And there's something misleading about just saying that you're going to receive communion. Because receiving the Lord, that's just part of it. The Lord will come in His body, soul, and divinity to you. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we automatically engage with Him. We must be willing to do that. We must be willing to surrender our pride and our ego and everything that we have so that we can relate everything to the Lord, so that we may remain open to Him. And He can come and talk to us, and we talk to Him. Otherwise, you just receive something and eat it and forget it. And that's not the point of it. The point of receiving Holy Communion is for you to engage the Lord. It's for you to be at that mountain where the Lord wants to transfigure, where the Lord wants to show you His radiant face. And so today the Lord is coming to you. Will you speak to the Lord? Will you let His face be transfigured before you?